So welcome everybody to this interview. Today we're talking to Ariane Burgess from the Findhorn community. First, myself, my name is Anna Kovazna. I am the Education Director of Gen International, and also what in our collaborative governance system is called the Coordination Circle Lead Link. This is a special interview for me because I am also a member of the Findhorn community and have been since 10 years. So I'm speaking to home and speaking about a place that I really, really love. So Findhorn is located on the north coast of Scotland. It's one of the largest and oldest European communities in our network. This year it celebrates its 59th birthday. It has over 400 residents, depends on how you count, from about 25 countries. It's also home to more than 40 different independent organizations and businesses. Its focus is on living and exploring three core principles, which are inner listening, co-creation with nature, and love in action. And one thing that I know for sure is that the Findhorn community is not one thing, it's many. And there's not just one way of living there, there are many. People even like to say that Findhorn is not an intentional community because there was no intention to create a community when the founders moved their caravan onto the land where the Ecovillage is today. And yet here we are so many years later, having changed a lot throughout the years, still changing and still exploring how to live those core principles now. And I'm really happy to be joined today by Ariane. She has lived in the community for about 10 years, although she visited before. She's originally from Edinburgh and is deeply involved in the governance of the whole community, where she was instrumental in bringing sociocracy to Findhorn. Another of her passions is permaculture. So she's been really a central figure in our forest garden and our outdoor learning center. She is a long-standing teacher and facilitator of Findhorn's Ecovillage design education, and also really active in changing the whole region and Scotland, including being a Scottish Green Party candidate for Parliament in our upcoming election. So welcome, Ariane. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Anna. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Nice. And can we just start with you telling me a little bit about Findhorn? Like, what is it really? How are you organized? What's life like? And what are the most important things that bring you together?
Wow, that is a big question and complex. I think Findhorn has evolved. What I like to think of is that it has evolved from, the initial seed form in the 60s when the founders, Dorothy, Peter, and Eileen arrived on the land with the caravan and the Caddy's children. That was the kind of seed form and a kind of very strong intentionality. They all had a strong spiritual practice and, found their way into the core principles that you mentioned, listening within, co-creation with nature, and works, love, and action. And that was at a time, I think about it as like at a time where people's connection to spirit was often through strong dogmatic religious forms, and here they were offering something different. They put that call out to the world. I think they were very good at sharing that experience, and it attracted a lot of people. Since that time, it really has evolved, and now we are this incredible, flourishing, multi-organization community. And it's depending on the doorway you enter into the community, you will have a completely different experience. And if you talk to every member of the community, you will get a different description. So it's difficult to really say it, but I would say, to define it in one way, I think those three principles really are in the core of people's lives, and many people try to practice that way of living. And my attraction was, I think, particularly out of concern around the ecological crises we face. So that I was actually deeply involved in, I would say, maybe more spiritual work at the time when I was living in New York City, but I was starting to realize that we needed tangible solutions and responses. And I started to realize that community could lead that way and have the power. So I think, while I come with a spiritual underpinning, it's the ecological and kind of like material responses that are really important to me. And I think that the community has done really well. And in a way, what I love about the community is that there is this, it's not either or. There's this relationship between a spiritual and an inner life that is valid and important as much as the whatever external material forms that we create. And this piece that the, you know, kind of like the striving or the intending to have things materialize in a way that is in harmony with nature. Now that's really important to me, and I think it's really important to everybody that lives in the community.
That's beautiful. Do you want to tell me a bit more about your own journey? Like you mentioned a little bit of it, but how did you arrive and what do you do in the community now?
So yeah, sure. I actually grew up knowing about Findhorn because a colleague of my father's came to visit Edinburgh, and his wife was quite a progressive person at the time in the 70s, and she made the journey to Findhorn, and she came back bringing the book The Magic of Findhorn. And I remember looking at that book and being very attracted to it, looking through the pages and the images of the gardens. And so it was always there as a backdrop of this kind of special and important place in Scotland. But it wasn't until 2005 that I actually visited, and it was at the invitation of a group of people that were coming from the US, where I was living at the time, to the Global Ecovillage Network Conference, plus 10, I think it was. So there had been, the first conference had been 1995, and this was 10 years on. And it was an incredible conference, people from communities all over the world, thinkers, you know, days of really great ideas and thoughts. And that was really important to me because it just kind of galvanized this piece that communities do have an important role in what we need to be doing and going forward. So I came to that conference, and then the following year I came back to do the first Ecovillage design course. And then subsequently was invited to come back to actually teach on the course, some of the elements of the course. So and then at some point I realized I needed to come back to Scotland, and I decided to make Findhorn my home. Yeah.
And I know you've had a lot of roles, and like you've done many things in the community. What are you up to now in the community, or in like your most recent times?
Yeah, so at the moment my role is so two projects. One is as the co-focalizer of what I would say maybe is a backbone organization, and it's called the Collaboration Circle. And this has grown out of a need for collaboration around things that need to take place or have thought in the community, and that overlap a number of different organizations. So for example, housing was quite an issue. Affordable housing was quite a big issue and still is, but some years ago it was really an issue because there just wasn't affordable housing, and it was impossible for young people to find a foothold in the community. So there was a big initiative to kind of look at that and address it, and that has been successfully addressed. And I think that was one of the projects that really the Collaboration Circle and some kind of collective action needed to happen. So that was pulling that together. So the circle continues on, and one of the, also I think a very good project that they did together was to create a whole community purpose, because the we're very proud to say that the community evolved organically. And, you know, as you said in the introduction, it was never really an intentional community. So it was an organic evolution. And then there was a realization in the last, 5, 6, 7 years of we need to get clear on what is our collective purpose, even though there are many different organizations and individual actions responding to the call of the community. there needed to be some kind of, I think, membrane or envelope that held us all together. So that's been a very beautiful project. And it's an evolving, the whole community purpose is evolving. It's a draft, it's in draft form, because then it allows for development and change. So that's one project. And then another one that's just, so it's a two-part project. I initiated our small forest garden. So, forest garden sounds wow, but I would say it's a little baby forest garden. It's about 5 or 6 years old now. And as part of that, we have been creating an outdoor learning space, because we wanted to create a place where we could take people even more deeply into connection with nature, but be in a sheltered space. Because, one day in Scotland, you get all of the weather patterns from snow to sunshine. So in order to be able to bring people onto the land for, protracted lengths of time, we wanted to have this shelter. And we also wanted, because it's part of the forest garden, we wanted to have a place where we could harvest the food that we're growing in the garden and then actually prepare it in the learning space. So we've got a very simple setup for cooking there, and then we can share the food together. And I think that's a really important piece of work there, reconnecting people to the gathering and harvesting, or even the kind of longer term, planting and growing, gathering, harvesting, preparing food, and then sharing a meal. So so those are my two current projects.
That's really lovely. And also, it makes me think about, in a community of Findhorn scale, like sometimes we become like very specialized in certain parts. Like we have a community garden, so our food is grown like in one place, which means that not every community member grows their food, right? So there's still space somehow, even though we have things in place, there can be space for like really increasing individual engagement in various, I don't know if it's nature connection or, how we're governed and that. And I think it's an interesting aspect of being such a large community. It just came to mind. And I also thought when you were speaking, like you spoke about different doors, people who come through different doors in the community, they have different experiences. And it sounds like your door has been partly ecological, or like an interest in the ecology, or like this material, there. And then your interest in how we're organized. And a lot of people come for a reason that you also mentioned, but it's the spiritual practice and like the cultural life of the community. What are some of like the key kind of practices and things in our culture that makes it so rich and regenerative?
I would say that the foundation of the community is meditation practices. There are 5 or 6 very beautiful, what are called sanctuaries. So quiet spaces where people can go at any time, but there are key times throughout the day where community can come together to meditate together. So in the morning, there's a meditation time. Of course, all of this has had to stop in the last year because of our need for physical distancing with COVID. So we'll see what reemerges when things move forward. I'll say it like that, because I'm not sure if we're going to get back to any kind of normal. But I think that people have brought that into their homes. So that's quite an important piece for people to come back to, that presencing and centering and the inner listening practice. Another practice that's very strong in the community is singing. And that takes all kinds of forms and singing together. So there's a morning practice called Thésée, which was developed in France and brought to the community by a community member, and it really has taken root and is a strong part for many people. And then there's also a myriad of other choirs with different types of songs, and I think that's such a powerful experience for people to sing together. It's such an opening of the heart to sing and express in that way. And I think there's quite a lot of people who may have arrived in the community and go, I'm not a singer, and sooner or later they are a singer. I think the other thing that's strong is crafts and arts is very strong in the community. We've got a thriving clay-based pottery collective, and then strong art, strong enough art and art interest to have the realization of the Murray Arts Centre, which is, you know, a kind of ecological building and gallery, runs art classes, and you know, and that came out of the kind of roots of the arts being very strong here as well. And then, of course, there's performing arts. That's quite a strong cultural practice here. We have the Universal Hall, which is an incredible building that was really community built, and it's kind of, yeah, so it's a 5-sided building. You kind of really have to go in it to experience it. And that works both as our community meeting hall for large scale meetings, large scale processing of any issues that need to happen, but it also gets transformed into this amazing concert and theatre space, and welcomes performers from all over the world and all over Scotland.
I can feel my love and appreciation of our local life just growing listening to you. It's fun. You also spoke about this, like that one of the beauties somehow of Findhorn community life is that it's also material, you know, it has intention and it has all these like practices, but it's also material. So what about some of those like ecological solutions? How have we organized that?
I think that, well, we've got many really great and leading edge, or were leading edge at the time that they were created, projects. And I think that some of them they kind of happen either because there's, oh, it's a new idea and it's leading edge. And I would say one that comes to mind is our, what's called the Living Machine. And that came to light when when the Ecovillage part of the community was really initiated in the mid-90s. So that happened because the neighboring farmer wanted to sell land. And I mean, I'll digress a little bit actually, because that's an interesting thing for me about communities that, and I think it's been a challenge for our community, is that we had a very finite piece of land just because of the way the community evolved. And we butted right up to the neighboring farmer and the neighboring landowner. And so each time land came up for sale, the community had to respond, because if it didn't respond, another person or organization could have responded and created a development that wasn't aligned right on the edge of the community, because the community happens to be in really a prime, beautiful spot where many people actually want to live in Scotland. So I think that's an interesting thing. It's like, for anyone who's listening and wants to set up a community, I think the parcel of land that you choose is really important, and who's on the edge. And I've never visited, but I love the model of Ithaca Ecovillage, where they've got a large piece of land and their housing takes up a small part of that. And then they've got a lot of forest and farming areas around. And so they're not having to react to what the neighbors do. So Findhorn's had to kind of evolve organically to some extent because of what the neighbors have done. So the Ecovillage part happened in the mid-90s, and the Living Machine was a vision connected to that. And that's basically that all of the wastewater in the houses that were built, the first set of houses that were built for the Ecovillage, are connected to a system where all the wastewater, so black and gray, goes into a holding tank where it's all broken down with microbes, and then the wastewater then moves through a series of other tanks that are basically in a big greenhouse, other tanks that are full of amazing plants. And it's the microbes on the roots of those plants that are busy purifying, cleaning the water. And at the end, you have water that's clean. You can't drink it. You wouldn't want to water your vegetables with it, but you could certainly water trees with it. And so that to me is just, you know, a really great example of the ecological system. And at the moment, that water, at the moment, what we need to do with that water that is coming out of that system is actually build a forest around it, so that we can be, I think a food forest would be great. So that's one project. Then there was also the Ecovillage houses themselves. At the time the houses were built, they were leading edge, again, in terms of insulation, and yeah, many of the building technologies were leading edge for Scotland. So that was great. I think another project that, again, this was an initiative seen by an individual community member as, this is something that's needed, and that was transportation. Because of the location of the community and the local public transport not being so great, people really do need to have cars, but not everybody necessarily has the funds to run a car full time by themselves. So this was the car share scheme that went from basically a few people pooling 3 cars to we now have well over 100 members, cars located in 10 different locations, not just in the community, not just in the Ecovillage part of the community, but across the whole area, across the Findhorn Bay area. And that's just been an incredible resource for so many people who can't afford to have a car, or don't want to have a car of their own, but they want to be able to take trips or just even go get shopping. I use it every week to go get my shopping. It's a lifeline for me.
Yeah, definitely. And also giving access to electric vehicles for a lot of us, because
Absolutely.
that's even more expensive. And I'm really proud of how the Moray car share has been able to do that and also serve the region. Well, I think it's also beautiful to see, like you touched on it, how some of the systems, they kind of started in the community, but then they grow and kind of permeate also the region around us, which is amazing. Yeah. How about the economy? It's always an interesting element of community life, and often quite challenging. How is the economic life of Findhorn organized?
I think it's organized in a lot of different ways. And so you have an organization like the Findhorn Foundation that until recently, and I would say that's the, like that's the kind of like the seed organization that kind of spawned everything else. And for, up until, obviously the arrival of the pandemic, COVID in our lives, that's forced, well, a rethinking to some degree. But so that was an organization that's economy was based on running workshops and courses around personal transformation and spiritual development. So that was very much about bringing people from around the world to have this experience in this very special place. Then there's we have a lot of people doing kind of solo entrepreneurial things, from somebody who makes a very, very special, unique little piece that goes onto your neck for playing the violin, the bit you rest your neck on. We got people doing graphic design, quite a lot of people involved in the healing modalities. So anywhere from massage, cranial, sacral, all of those kinds of energy healing, all of that kind of work. And then the choirs create they are an income generator for the people that run the choirs. Pottery is another income generator. And also we've got an incredible weaving studio that also is an income generator. I'm not entirely sure that we have completely solved the economy piece, because we have quite a lot of young people that come to the community. They're attracted because of the call of our times, is like, how do we change our lives and respond to the climate and nature emergencies? And we have young people arriving, and we're not able to kind of like, open our arms and go, or here, come, stay, we can employ you. So some of them get creative and create their own businesses, and some of them, they leave. Another one actually has been quite a lot of work done around growing food, and there's been a great initiative to have local growers network through using online technology. So a little bit of a development from the kind of traditional box scheme that some communities run to a system whereby you or I can go online once a week and buy what we want. What I love about the system is that then the growers just harvest exactly what's been ordered. Whereas a box scheme, often the growers will harvest everything because they don't know what people want, and then people don't necessarily use it. So this system worked really well in terms of minimizing food waste, which is quite a big issue. So yeah, I think one of the things I've often thought about that we could do better, because we actually have quite a lot of brilliant thinkers around economy and people with lots of skills around setting up social enterprise, that kind of thing. I think we could be good around offering that kind of training for younger people who've got, want to take initiative, but maybe don't have some of the knowledge to get social enterprises or not even social enterprises, just businesses started. So I'd like to see more of that happen.
Nice. I think a fascinating thing also about our economy is that many of our kind of key pieces, like our shop and cafe and this, they used to be part of one organization, like the Findhorn Foundation. And then in a big economic crisis in the 90s, about at the same time as the community really started growing, the foundation had to let go of them. So now we have a lot of pieces of the community that used to be within a charity, but that are basically cooperatives, or at least cooperatively owned. And it's one of those pieces where I find it's really interesting how the times also influence what's possible, and how kind of, much broader economic patterns also have, of course, a fundamental influence on community life. Think about
yes,
that.
absolutely. Yeah, and also the solar panel company as well came from, and that, but I mean, I think what you point to there is almost like the foundation acted as an incubator, and maybe that's what I'm touching on, is like we need that incubator space again, because the thing is also those, the shop, because of what it sold, was very progressive, very unusual at the time. Now it's just normal, and you have people coming from like 200 miles away once a month to buy their big shop. So yeah, I think that incubator type space could be very good. Again, just to kind of take the next wave of response to what what it is to have an ecological life.
I think we've touched on it also, but now, of course, I'm going to come to the social question. And one of it is just like how we come together and, do all those things, our community center and activities and meetings. But another really is about governance. And I mean, you've touched on it like kind of throughout, how really the community started off as a family, and then like a bigger kind of collective. And then it was one organization for quite some time, like one charity. And now it's this like plethora of many different organizations that each take like care of a part of our community life or our economic life, or kind of channel the creativity of community members. And it's like how do you govern that? Like how do we keep or not a kind of shared sense and that. And I know that's also part of like the evolutionary step that I think the community is at. So I'm really curious about that, like partly the simple things of our social life, but also really that how do we align and organize and keep this incredible diversity of initiative that we also have?
Yes, I mean, I think that's some of what the collaboration circle is seeking to do. I think it's quite difficult too, because when I was outside community and looking in, I was like, oh, it's one defined thing. It's the community. And that is, I think, what happens for people around the world. They think of Findhorn or any ecovillage or any, intentional community as one thing. And of course you arrive and it's not one thing. And very quickly I started to understand that when you have a different organization, it has to have its own governance documents. It has to have its own constitution and its own objectives under charitable law in Scotland. And so you have organizations that they've got remits, they've got boards of directors and remits, and they have to fulfill those remits. And so sometimes it's difficult to pull everybody together because they've got to respond to those responsibilities. I'd say that as the community grew, as you said, in the 90s, one of the kind of, that was acknowledged by some of our, I would say, some of our community elders at this point, and elders not in age, but elders in kind of wisdom and kind of very much holding of the community. And they realized that there needed to be something that was not the foundation, but holding this larger growing membership of people who were not necessarily working for the foundation, but were settling in community life. And so that brought about the what we fondly call the NFA, which is the New Findhorn Association. And so the idea with that is that ideally all people who feel associated to the community and live within a 50-mile radius are members of it. Not everybody is, and you don't have to be, but that's a body where we have monthly meetings and come together around, you know, kind of the issues that are up. And the issues that are up can be, you know, anything from, you know, how do we respond to COVID, to some years ago there were some issues around fencing, and that led into several big, beautiful processes where people really were held to express their distress of having to have fences or not being able to have fences. You know, and that's an issue, right? And it kind of brings to light the different desires in the community. Some people want to grow their own food, and then that meant how do you have a relationship with nature, namely deer and rabbits that also like eating your food. So you know, so the NFA holds a lot of those kinds of processes, and yeah, it's the leader body of the NFA is 2 people who are elected into roles called listener conveners. So that's very much what they do. They're trying to listen to what's coming in the community, what's up for people, and then convening us around those things. And then the other part of the leader body is counselors who basically take on particular aspects in the community and try to kind of support the listener conveners to develop those initiatives. And that can be anywhere up to 12. And actually we've got our elections coming up very soon. And it's really exciting actually, because I was just reading all of the profiles of the people that want to stand, and it's a really, really rich group of people. I'm not sure if we've got all 12 positions filled for the council, but certainly people who are really getting the importance and really keen. And lovely to see also like people coming back, wanting to stand again after a few years break, and people who've been living in the community for a while now, and maybe haven't had that much interest in the governance, and then they're going, I love this place, I want to step into this role. So that's really exciting to see that.
I love that, just that phrase, like I love this place, so I want to do something. I feel like it motivates so much of what we do. It's just like, I love this place and these people, like this is my place and my people, and somehow it draws out of community members like what my gift is to it. You know, for some it's governance, and for some it's like our amazing like arts and performance, you know, that's there, and for some it's the buildings, and like it's beautiful for me to see what we create together when we really connect, like from a space of just loving where we are and, you know, contributing.
I'm going to pick up on that a bit, because I think one of the things that happens is people come, and quite a lot of people have come through attending foundation programs, and the foundation programs are very transformational. A lot of people have big openings in their lives, shifting changes, and then they decide they want to come and live in the community. And going through a program, which is very held, is a very different thing than coming to live in the community. And I think there can be an initial piece of like, oh my goodness, where have I landed? This is different. So it takes people maybe different lengths of time to go from being in that very held experience to realizing actually they need to become some of the holders of the wider community. And I think that's what I see happening here. And it's interesting to me because actually a good few of the people who are standing for council are actually creative artist, theater performer folks who realize that actually this bit of holding and governing and decision making is really important. That container is really important. So I think being in the, you know, somebody said to me a long time ago, are you, you know, are you ready if you live in community to have some of the greatest personal and spiritual development training? Because when you come into community, it's like, yeah, we're all attracted around certain ideas or aspects of ideas. And there is, you know, often people point to a tension in the Findhorn community between those who are on the ecological kind of track and those that are on the spiritual track. And my sense is actually, no, those two things work together. It's like if you go into nature deeply, 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 you're going to find spirituality. And I think if you go deeply into spirituality, you're going to, you know, the nature connection piece is really important. So yeah, so those are so those two elements are really important, and I think the holding of the container and people kind of stepping into the roles that kind of can keep that container alive is, yeah, essential.
What do you think are some of the biggest benefits for people living in the community, like of community life?
I think if you live in community life, you don't have to be part of a program, because you will grow, because you will, you know, just needing to interact. You will, you know, I have been collaborating and working with all kinds of people I may not have come across in, you know, a more normal life. And so I've developed and grown from that, from, you know, having to interact with people and get to grips with taking on big projects that I might not have, you know, I was involved in the co-housing project here, that was an amazing opportunity that I might not have otherwise been able to engage with. So yeah, I think that an expanded awareness of what it is to be human. I think there's also another element in our community that's very beautiful, and that's around the caring aspect. So the kind of realization that community doesn't just happen, and there's a kind of whole caring initiative. And that caring initiative is, yes, it's for people who are, you know, maybe in a stage of life where they need care because of physical challenges or health challenges. But I think it's also just caring and being with each other and acknowledging that is something that we're looking for by coming to be in community, that you don't find necessarily in life in general. So I think, yeah, that caring bit is very rich. But again, it just, yeah, fundamentally, we discover ourselves, I think, by being in community.
What do you think some of the big challenges are?
Well, the diversity, right? We welcome diversity, and we, you know, and it's a very open form that the community takes. So if you have an initiative and you can get enough people to support you, it can happen. But, you know, also that creates tensions, because there have been some initiatives that people have, you know, acted upon that then have maybe not so haven't really taken the time to communicate well enough, and you know, and then that's been difficult for other people to accept. And maybe the fencing one was one of those ones. But I think that brought us into this really amazing process that created more depth of relationship. I think that is actually one of the things that we work. I not say on a daily life, but on a daily basis. But I think we are aware that conflict is not something to be afraid of, but that actually conflict is a point of evolution and an opportunity to deepen relationship with one another. We don't always get it right. I had to work with a conflict recently, and you know, I held a process for that, and thought that it had moved to a good place where the people involved were kind of more deeply connected. But sometimes these things need longer holding, And so that one's still working its way through. Yeah.
Nice. I'm also thinking, Findhorn is an old community, and it's lived through a lot of changes, but it's still there. So what do you think has made Findhorn so resilient? And I know it's also been a really challenging year. And are there some ways that that resilience has shown up, like in the past year?
I think that, some of what has made Findhorn resilient is the initial call, the founding principles. And in a way, there's been a resilience because it's like I started to realize that Findhorn is a bit like, the landscape of Findhorn is that we're surrounded by it's a very tidal area. Like we're surrounded by sea water that comes and goes, and it feels the same as with the humans that come. It's very tidal. So because of the nature of the Findhorn Foundation, we were having waves of people coming and going, and it's almost like the tide comes in and lots of people come, and some of them are so deeply affected that they stick like little limpets on the rocks and find their niche to stay, and some people move on, and people come for the time that they need to come.
I know it's been a tough year. Like a lot of the community life has been shut down. All the educational activities had to stop. So there was like quite a big financial crisis for some community members, and yet like, it's still thriving. Are there some things that you see in the responses to the crisis that you think are kind of, this is like a real Findhorn way of approaching this that kind of shows our strength?
Yeah, so when it became clear that we were going to move into lockdown, again, it was the kind of caring aspect kind of sprang to life. And I mean, actually across the whole area, there was a kind of proliferation of COVID responsive groups. And so both within the nearby town and villages and at the Ecovillage. And the Ecovillage group was called the COVID Action Group. And it was people just stepping forward and volunteering and realizing that with lockdown, we were going to lose a big part of the coming together, like, life was sharing meals together in the community center or singing together. Or just hanging out in a cafe having a coffee or a tea. So life before the pandemic arrived in Scotland and in the community was very much many punctuation points throughout the day where you could come into connection with people and have great conversations and transformational moments. And the realization that that was not going to be possible. So how to look after people, and a kind of realization that people were going to start, and people did begin to struggle with mental health. I think one of the beautiful responses was through the arts. Some of the kind of performing arts folks set up the town crier. And it's grown into a movement, and it happens with, so in the first lockdown, it was a kind of weekly activity of going around and kind of proclaiming the news and creating little moments in the different neighborhoods or the different housing clusters, moments where people could be lifted in spirit and get a bit of news and a bit of humor coming to their door and seeing the town criers. And that's evolved now into these amazing events. One just happened last weekend, where it's called the Artist Carousel. So basically artists, again, all honoring physical distancing and safety regulations, artists position themselves around the community. And then there's an invitation for community members to kind of promenade around the community and discover these little performances happening. So I think that, resilience in that kind of situation, those kinds of ways are like, how can we connect And so, you know, having those town criers and these performances for creating connection and lifting spirit, and also the performance is kind of reflecting our situation or being humorous. That's one aspect. And then we leaned in incredibly to the whole online thing. So even though, you know, people live within the village, I mean, there is a wider, I want to acknowledge that there are many people who are connected to the but we were able to really lean into the whole online connection, and a lot of events moved online. It was hard for the singing because, you know, that's kind of technological, not everybody being able to sing at the same time, but meetings and events and sharings, and a series of events on witnessing that were very beautiful for people to kind of share their experiences and be witnessed in that. So I think that's been good. It's been a real awareness of something, some holding needed to continue.
I'm curious about something we haven't talked about that I know you're also quite passionate about, which is the relationship of the Findhorn community to its like bioregion and to Scotland as such. How do you see that relationship happening or evolving?
You know, it's interesting actually, because when I came to Findhorn for the first time, which was for the conference I mentioned earlier, the GEN conference, Robert Gilman was there. And one of the things that he was talking about in his session was, so there was kind of some themes in the conference, and he brought forward one of the themes, and he was adamant that eco-villages needed to embed themselves in the local political system. And I think he at the time had stepped forward for some kind of governance role on the island where he lived. I don't exactly remember what it was, but that really made an impression on me, that eco-villages or intentional communities can't just exist like little isolated bubbles of utopia, but they actually need to be networked and connected in order to thrive. You need to have these networks, not just in governance or decision making, but in many ways. And I think the community has done a brilliant job. You know, the car share is just one example of that. So yes, that left an impression on me. The other thing at the GEN conference was the whole need for young people to engage in the Global Ecovillage Network, and I think that's been an incredible incredible initiative that has really taken hold. There's so many young people that are involved throughout GEN. But yeah, back to the politics. So I think I got very involved in the independence movement in Scotland because I think I think communities need to have power, decision-making power, and the ability to raise taxes locally as possible. And Scotland has a very, it's not a very local system. So we've got a Scottish Parliament, we've got decisions and power that's held at a UK government level. We've got decisions and power making that's held at a Scottish Parliament Scottish government and Parliament level. And then we've got 32 local authorities. And I know we were talking at one point about the village in France where you've been staying, where there's 250 people and you have a mayor. And we don't have that. We've got thousands of people in a local authority, and we have local councils. So we have that here. But in my involvement in the independence movement, I developed connections with our local Scottish Member of Parliament and the Member of Parliament at that time for the UK Parliament. And what I really understood from both of them is that they understood the importance of the community and the influences and the innovation that the community brought to the area. A very, very high level of regard and respect for the things that were coming and being created. And now what I see happening is that not initiated by the community, but I think influenced by the community, is a big climate assembly initiative the Moray Climate Assembly, and a lot of motivation around how can we get Moray, which is our local authority area, to start to meet milestones and climate targets, and using the COP26, which is going to happen in Glasgow, hopefully in November this year. So a lot of excitement and initiative, and I've been to a few of the meetings, and I would say I look around the Zoom at all the faces, and there's a lot of community members in the space, which is really exciting, and leading in a lot of different ways. So one initiative around how can we create community benefit projects based on wind farm generation. So there's going to be some wind farms, big scale wind farms created in Moray, and this project that's being initiated by community member really is to kind of see how can all the community councils benefit, and then see income generated from those wind turbines come not just to the park, but also the eco-village, but also to all of the communities around Moray. So that's one initiative. And then there are people that are there from the kind of caring space and really vigilant around the need for a response to climate that attends to our mental health and well-being. So the Climate Assembly doesn't really have any political teeth yet, but I think that's some of what I'm standing on for election. Is a lot of what I'm saying whenever a journalist asks me, or when I go to hustings, is that community is going to be an essential part of our response to the climate and nature emergencies. I think village scale responses where people are looking at, how can we do an economy that is resilient and local and works with nature? How can, and creates the jobs for people and keeps people and makes it possible for young people to make a choice to live in the area. And what I see is that there are big challenges to take those things on for communities, because when we talk about community, that means there's another word for, in many cases, volunteer-led. People just doing things because they know they need to happen and they're passionate about it. And I think that needs to change, because to sustain volunteer-led initiatives over a long time, when people still need to pay rent and things like that, is quite challenging. So there's some things there that I want to get involved in if I'm elected. There's some things that I think could really help communities globally, which would be if we could start to, if countries could start to bring in universal basic income, so some form of minimum income, so we all have it. It's not about a benefit system where you're tested, but it's universal and unconditional, and everybody gets it. That could be an incredible piece of infrastructure in terms of giving us the potential to start to think really well about how do we design our ecological regenerative communities for the next years to come, that are going to thrive and are going to be able to be resilient. So that's some of what I would like to do if I get elected, is try to remove the blocks and make things more accessible, easier. Another one is affordable housing. So there's a community fund for affordable housing in Scotland, but it's very difficult for communities to access it because they need to actually come up with an initial amount of money to take their project through planning regulations. So it's a very big financial stumbling block. And so on one hand, we have these big problems around rural housing in the right place for young people, and that's affordable. And we've got the funds, but there isn't the bridge to access. So again, these are the things I think I'd be really looking for. That I've seen the struggles in our community. I've seen our struggles in our community, and I know that's happening in other communities across Scotland. And so how can, at that kind of national level, can we make legislation that just makes it easier for these things to happen? Because this election, the Scottish Greens were saying, this is the climate election. There's basically 9 years, right? If we're going to meet the 2030 targets that climate scientists are saying we need to respond to. we've got 9 years. So that means that this next election is, Greens, we're electing representatives for the next 5 years. And then those next 5 years, we've got to get things in place that really support communities to take action and become resilient.
What's the biggest thing you've learned from being a community member in Findhorn that you take with you into your political work?
I don't know. I don't know if there's one thing, but it's interesting actually, because when governance, I think it's like my background and training originally was in the arts, and I've been on a massive, big, long journey and lots of life learning. And I think coming into the community, what I started to really look at was, where is power? Where is the decision making? And I think that, because it's so complex, the community, it's difficult for people to, and it can be quite frustrating, I think, for some people who arrive in the community and go, well, I'd like to do this, or I would have changed this. And they, it's hard to see where the decision making and the power lies. And so that became a fascinating thing for me in the community, the whole idea of governance and decision making, and what do you need in place to create potential for sharing that power in a constructive way. And I think that's what led me to sociocracy, because what I love about that is that it's not flat, and it's not a flat power structure. It's both. It's hierarchical, and it's also horizontal. And I think you need that, because if you just go for a flat structure, oh, we're all equal, we've all got the same power, there's nothing to drive what you're trying to do. So I think it's a both and that we need. So I think I take that with me. It's like the importance of creating the spaces where all voices can be heard, but then creating the energy and the engine to then realize and move beyond just like a constant talking and talking and talking. That piece of having the confidence to say yes and make a commitment to something, which also means that we have to say no to all of these other wonderful things that we could be doing. But at some point, there has to be a yes and an acknowledgement that that means there's no's. But in the yes, then so much more opens up, and it takes us to the next place. So yes to affordable housing, or yes to the living machine, and then what comes from those things.
Thank you. I think it's beautiful. I'm just struck by, somehow it's like your own journey in the community, as you describe it, like from coming into this kind of with the focus, on the community and on the like small spiritual or cultural or, governance practices there, and then kind of growing back into wider society and to Scotland, and how you say like other community members are doing the same. And I know it's like beyond what we've talked about, also our gardens are working much more with local society, and like the car share, the wind park, the shop, like all of these things, like as the community has grown older, it's kind of spreading out, it's like merging, and as people arrive, they also like dive in and then go out. And somehow I can like see this vision, like at some point, this, it's like the boundary of who we are is becoming more and more blurred, and it's a beautiful journey. It's like a beautiful journey of really, really embodying being a learning center that then can enable us to like act outside. And I think it's true for Findhorn and for many older communities. And I feel like throughout this talk, just what you've shared has so illustrated that, like both on the collective and the individual level. So really thank you for that. And we're coming close to our wrapping time also.
I feel I want to add something, just because this is the Global Ecovillage Network Summit. And I think another thing that I got to was that, again, responding to the ecological and climate emergencies, that we're not necessarily going to build lots of ecovillages, but what can happen, I think that's what I think, again, a role I want to play is, how do we bring all of the really good learning and elements that ecovillages, and the older ones as you talk about, how do we bring that to existing villages, to the existing villages in our countries, and in some places many of those things are there. Maybe they just died down, and they just need the support and confidence to acknowledge that those traditional ways were important or were good, or bringing a car share scheme, or some of the newer ideas. So I think that's an important thing for me too, is not necessarily, we don't have to necessarily start a new eco-village. That's a massive undertaking. But what is it that we can draw from the learning of intentional and eco-village communities, and bring it to existing places? And that doesn't even need to be a village. It could be a neighborhood in a massive city. What can we bring to a neighborhood in a big city as well?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think it's the next frontier for Gen and for eco-villages all around the world, to really scale our response and to really involve people like that, and to truly be the demonstration and experimental like sites that we are, and little seeds wherever we are, and really locally embedded. I love that you brought that in so clearly. Like, at the end of the day, we're connected in a global network, but we're local, and our resilience and our impact also depends on how locally embedded we are and how well we tend to our local relationships with other people, as well as non-human aspects of the world, our ecosystems, and that. So I heartily agree. And I want to thank you so much, Ariane, for taking the time. I know you've been very busy with community life and upcoming elections. So thank you for your time. Best of luck. And it was a joy talking to you.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, it was really lovely to actually be asked the questions and kind of like go on the journey and remember, and also kind of bring out just some of the aspects. And as I just want to say that that's it's my experience and my perspective, and you could have the same conversation with so many more people, and it would be different. And that is really about the mosaic of community life.
Absolutely. I also want to encourage people, like, if they want to know more about the Findhorn Foundation or the community, the foundation is very active on social media, have lovely live streams and all kinds of things, and actually still really needs your support. So if you're interested, you who are watching, in the community, please do visit websites and social media, attend or check out the online learning offers, and that the whole community is really trying to step up in exactly what Ariane is saying, like bringing the knowledge from that deep experiment in one place into the world in new ways. So.